My name is Charlotte Morgan. When I was 17, my parents threw me out of the house because I was pregnant. I can still hear the sound of the security deadbolt locking. It didn't just end a night. It ended a childhood. I slept under bridges, shaking in the Boston frost, whispering to a baby I'd never get the chance to hold. That night, I made a promise to myself. One day, they would remember the name they tried to erase. 22 years later, they came back. Not to say sorry. Not to ask for forgiveness. They came back to sue me. For $50 million and a 40% stake in my edtech empire. The one I built from the ashes of their rejection. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. The Morgan House in Boston wasn't a home. It was a museum of legacy. Cold stone and colder portraits. I still remember the smell of that night. Old books and fireplace smoke. The smell of the library. The room where all the verdicts were handed down. I was 17. I stood on the Persian rug. My hands shaking so hard, I could barely hold the small plastic stick. 2 pink lines. My father, David Morgan. He didn't even look up from his mahogany desk. He was reviewing blueprints for a new property in Back Bay. This issue, he said, his voice perfectly level, will complicate the Back Bay merger. An illegitimate child isn't just an embarrassment. Charlotte, it's a 100-year stain on the Morgan legacy. He finally looked up. His eyes weren't angry. They were calculating, like he was assessing a bad investment. My mother, Mary, stood by the fireplace, adjusting her pearls. She didn't look at me. She looked at my reflection in the dark window. We expected better from you, Charlotte, she whispered. Her voice was thinner than ice, and it cut deeper than any scream. I tried to find my own voice. It came out as just a whisper. I'm not getting rid of the baby. The air in the room didn't just freeze. It died. David stood up. Slowly. The calm was the terrifying part. He picked up the internal phone. Security. Miss Morgan is leaving. He looked at me. 10 minutes. He pointed to a small suitcase by the door. One I used for sleepovers. He'd already packed it. I tried to call Justin Price. The boy who'd sworn he loved me. Who'd made all those promises under the bleachers. The phone went straight to voicemail. Again. And again. I was grabbing my jacket when the security guard, a man who used to slip me candy, walked into the library. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Ma'am, it's time. They didn't walk me to the door. They watched me go. As I was pushed out into the entryway, I heard it. The heavy, final click of the security deadbolt locking behind me. It wasn't just a sound. It was a judgment. The Boston snowstorm hit me like a physical blow. The wind was merciless. I made it 2 blocks before I collapsed. The suitcase falling open. My few things scattering into the dirty snow. The next day, my phone buzzed. A single email. Not from Justin. It was from his father's law firm. Do not contact Justin Price again. Any further attempts will be considered harassment. He hadn't just abandoned me. He'd erased me. That first night, I slept at a bus stop in South Station. I used my backpack as a pillow. My coat too thin for the biting wind. I kept one hand over my stomach. Me fingers numb. Whispering apologies to a baby I hadn't even named. People walked by. They looked. And then they looked away. That's the first thing you learn when you're homeless. You're not a person. You're just a problem they're glad isn't theirs. By the 3rd night, the hunger was a dull, aching fire. The cold was worse. It felt personal. Judgmental. I saw families through the steamed-up windows of warm restaurants. Laughing. Sharing food. I was a ghost. Watching a world I was no longer part of. I was 17. From one of the richest families in Boston. And I was invisible. Weeks blurred into a numbness. The cold didn't just stay on my skin anymore. It seeped into my bones. I stopped feeling. I stopped caring. Survival was just motion. Finding alleys the wind didn't whip through. Finding dumpsters behind bakeries. I think it was January when I finally collapsed. The snow wasn't soft. It was sharp. Icy. And I didn't have the strength to get up. I remember lying in an alley behind a small, warm-looking bookstore. The Beacon Quill, the sign said. A small light in the window. I just stared at it until my eyes wouldn't stay open. I thought, this is it. This is where it ends. I'm sorry. When I woke up, I wasn't in the snow. I was on a small cot, in a room that smelled like paper and cinnamon. I was covered in a thick wool blanket. A shadow moved in the doorway. An older woman, with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back so tightly it looked severe. This was Patricia Russo. She wasn't looking at me with pity. That's what everyone else gave me. Pity. That look that said, you poor, broken thing. Patricia looked at me with recognition. You look like you're finally ready to fight back, she said. Her voice was rough, like gravel, but it was the warmest sound I'd heard in months. She brought me soup. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't call the police. She just handed me an apron. You can work for your keep, she said. The attic room is yours, as long as you earn it. Sweep the floors. Stock the shelves. So I did. I worked. I wiped down the wooden tables in her small cafe. I sorted books. I felt the life slowly, painfully, seep back into my hands. The Beacon Quill wasn't just a bookstore. It was a chain of them. Small, independent, and powerful. And Patricia, she didn't just run a business. She ran a small empire. She started teaching me, not just how to balance a ledger, but how to read people. Watch their hands. Charlotte, not their mouths, she'd say, wiping down the espresso machine. One night, long after we'd closed, she was looking over contracts. Never rush revenge, she said, not looking up from the page. Let them think you're broken. The longer they believe you're a victim, the easier they are to shatter. That sentence stuck to me. She introduced me to her family. Her real family. Stephen Ross, a young, razor-sharp lawyer who looked like he'd never smiled a day in his life. And Rachel Chen, a cybersecurity genius who could build or break any digital wall. They weren't just employees. They were her weapons. And now, they were my allies. Patricia handed me an old, heavy iron key one evening. It didn't unlock any door in the shop. This was from my first failed business, she said. A reminder. Don't let your anger make you hot, Charlotte. Let it make you cold. The coldest iron forges the strongest steel. I held that key. I started saving money. I started learning law from Stephen. And data from Rachel. I was building myself into something new. But the past wasn't done with me. The complications from those months on the street. The malnutrition. The hypothermia. They caught up with me. I lost the baby. I remember staring at the gray hospital ceiling. The beep of the monitor. The only sound. I was numb. But this time, it wasn't the numbness of the cold. It was the numbness of steel. Patricia sat by my bed. She didn't offer condolences. She just held my hand. You lost something precious, she said, her voice quiet. Don't let them take you. 2. Don't let them win. In that moment, the girl who was kicked out of the Morgan house died. The girl who cried in the snow died. I knew, with absolute certainty, who had taken my child from me. David and Mary Morgan. The grief didn't break me. It forged me. It took a few years. Years of working, saving, and planning. With Stephen's help, I filed adoption papers for a baby boy named Elijah. The day I held him, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, I made a new vow. He would never be invisible. He would never be cold. I took everything Patricia had taught me, every lesson, from Stephen and Rachel, and I founded Aperture Learning, an edtech company, a new legacy. I would build an empire so large that the Morgan name would be nothing but a shadow next to mine. 22 years went by. They didn't pass in a blur. They passed in late-night coding sessions, in investor meetings, in pacing the floor while my son, Elia, had a fever. They passed in building Aperture Learning from a single line of code into a giant in the edtech world. Elijah was 17. He was brilliant, kind, and had a mind like a steel trap. He was everything I'd ever hoped for. I had my penthouse in the city, a view of the Boston skyline, and a life I had forged with my own 2 hands. And then, the past came knocking. It arrived on a Tuesday. On thick, cream-colored stationery, the Morgan family crest embossed at the top. It was a letter from David and Mary. It was full of false warmth. Words like regret and long lost. They said they had watched my success with pride, and that they yearned to reconnect with me. And to finally meet their only grandson. Family is everything, they wrote. I laughed. The sound was dry, brittle. I handed the letter to Rachel Chen, my head of cybersecurity. Find out what they really want, I said. Rachel didn't need 48 hours. She needed 12. She walked into my office and put her tablet on my desk. No commentary, just data. They're not looking for a reunion. Char, she said. They're preparing for a war. On the screen was their search history, pulled from their server. Grandparent rights, Massachusetts. How to claim assets from an estranged child's company. Inheritance rights, through a grandchild. Filing for familial compensation. They didn't want my son. They wanted my company. I stared at the search logs. And suddenly, it all became crystal clear. I finally understood. It wasn't just about the money. Not really. My father, David. I couldn't stand that I had built an empire, bigger than his. And I'd done it without his name. My success wasn't his pride. It was a profound narcissistic injury. This was never about love or regret. This was retaliatory greed. They weren't trying to get back into my life. They were trying to control it. To punish me for daring to prove that I never needed them. They needed to make me small again. Okay, I said quietly. Let them. A few days later, the ghost showed up. Justin Price. My high school boyfriend. The one who'd let me be thrown to the wolves. He left a voicemail. He sounded broken. Desperate. Exactly what I expected. Char. It's Justin. God. It's been so long. Your parents reached out to me. They're really broken up. Char. They just want to fix things. Maybe it's time we all talked. For Elijah's sake. For Elijah's sake. The hypocrisy was almost impressive. I agreed to meet him. A public coffee shop. He looked older. Heavier. With the hollow eyes of a man who'd failed at everything. He tried a sad smile. You look amazing. Char. I am amazing. Justin. He fumbled with his coffee cup. Launching into the script, my parents had clearly fed him. How they regretted it every day. How they just wanted to be a family. So I played my part. I let my eyes fill with tears. I told him how hard it had been. How lonely it was. Running such a big company all by myself. I let my voice tremble. And then, I accidentally let it slip. It's just Elijah, I whispered, looking out the window. I set up this massive trust fund for him. Millions. But the lawyers, they structured it, so it's only accessible to immediate family. And right now, I'm the only one. It's a mess. I don't know what he'd do if something happened to me. I watched Justin's eyes. There it was. A tiny, greedy spark. He tried to hide it. But I saw it. The pawn had just seen the chessboard. He promised to talk to my parents. To see if he could help smooth things over. That night, Rachel Chen sent me an audio file. She'd been monitoring his phone ever since he called. It was Justin. Talking to my father. David. She bit. Justin said. His voice no longer sad. But excited. She completely bit. She's got a trust fund for the kid. Millions. And we can get at it if we're legally family. She's still the same weak girl. David. She's lonely. She's ready to break. Then I heard my father's cold, calm voice. The same voice from the library, 22 years ago. Good. Tell the lawyers. Prepare the papers. We're moving forward. I closed the audio file. I stood at my penthouse window, looking down at the lights of Boston. The city that had tried to freeze me to death. The trap was set. And this time, they weren't just walking into it. They were sprinting. The lawsuit was served. It was exactly what they had promised. $50 million in emotional damages and familial compensation. And a 40% stake in Aperture Learning. It was audacious. They didn't stop there. They went on a media blitz. David and Mary Morgan, the heartbroken grandparents, gave an exclusive interview to the Boston Globe. They painted a tragic picture of old money parents just trying to heal a family rift, being blocked by their cold, new money daughter. They were heartbroken, yearning to know their grandson. Their faces were everywhere, perfectly curated masks of grief and noble suffering. My mother, Mary, clutched her pearls and spoke about the unbreakable bond of blood. My father looked into the camera, his face a mask of regret, and said he'd do anything to make his family whole again. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. And for a week, it worked. The public narrative turned. I was the ungrateful daughter, the ice queen in her penthouse. Me lavier. Stephen Ross just smiled. He looked at the stack of newspapers on my desk. They're digging their own graves. Charlotte, he said, tapping the headline. Let them. The higher they build this, the harder they fall. The day of the hearing, the courthouse was a zoo. Reporters swarmed the steps. I saw them pull up. David, in a perfectly tailored Savile Row suit, looking somber. Mary, in dark gray, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Justin Price, their star witness, shuffled behind them, pale and sweating. They looked like the victims. I walked past them, head high, saying nothing. The courtroom was packed. Every eye was on us. David and Mary sat at the plaintiff's table, radiating manufactured dignity. Their lawyer stood up and began. He talked about the sanctity of family. He used the word bloodline 12 times in 10 minutes. He spoke of a grandmother's right and a grandfather's legacy. He painted me as a cold, isolated woman, poisoning my own son against the very people who gave me life. All the Morgans want, he finished, his voice trembling with false emotion, is to heal this family, to give this boy, Elijah, the one thing his mother's money can't buy him, a heritage. The room was silent. Even the judge looked moved. Then Stephen Ross stood up. He was calm, deliberate. Your Honor, he said, his voice cutting through the silence. We agree that family is important, which is why we are here to expose a criminal conspiracy, not a family dispute. A murmur went through the room. My father's lawyer jumped up. Objection. That's inflammatory. Is it? Stephen asked. Then I'd like to present Exhibit A. The courtroom lights dimmed. The large projector screen behind the judge flickered to life. It was an email from David Morgan to Justin Price. Subject: reconnecting with Charlotte. The text was large enough for everyone to read. Strategy: use the boy. He's the weak link. Make her feel guilty. Make her feel lonely. Once she softens, we file for access. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. And Exhibit B? Stephen continued, his voice like ice. The screen changed. It was a new email. She's vulnerable. The trust fund for the boy is the leverage. Push her. Then came the audio. Rachel had cleaned it up. It was crystal clear. First, Justin's voice. Nervous. Crackling over the speakers. I don't know. David? She seems different. What if this backfires? And then? My father's voice. That same cold, calm voice from the library. The voice that haunted my nightmares for 22 years. Nonsense. She's still the same 17-year-old fool we threw out. She's desperate for a family. We're the only one she has. You will push her until she breaks. You could hear a pin drop. My mother, Mary, was ashen. She was staring at my father, her eyes wide with a new kind of horror. She'd been in on the greed, but I don't think she ever knew just how cold his words were. David. David was staring at me, His mask of the grieving father was gone. His face was granite. Pure. Cold rage. Stephen Ross let the silence hang for a moment. As you can see, Your Honor, this was never about healing. It was a coordinated, premeditated attempt to extort $50 million. But that's not all, Stephen Ross said, his voice dropping, commanding the absolute silence of the room. The plaintiffs have built their entire case on the sacred, unbreakable bond of bloodline and family rights. He paused, then looked at the judge. There's just one problem with that. He signaled to his assistant. The screen flickered again. This was the final document. It wasn't an email. It wasn't an audio file. It was a legal document. 22 years old. Notarized by the state of Massachusetts. And at the bottom, the clear, arrogant signatures of David Morgan and Mary Morgan. My mother's breath hitched. She knew what it was. This, Stephen said, is a legal declaration of disownment and voided inheritance. Filed by Mr. Fadesign and Mrs. Morgan. 22 years ago. To protect the family estate and legacy. Stephen read the key lines aloud, his voice echoing in the dead quiet. We, David and Mary Morgan, do hereby declare that Charlotte Morgan is no longer our daughter, that she is disowned in all legal and familial capacity, and is permanently and irrevocably barred from any and all inheritance, trusts, or claims to the Morgan name. Stephen lowered the paper. He looked directly at my father. David was no longer enraged. He was empty, defeated. Your Honor, Stephen said, the plaintiff's entire case is that they have a right to familial compensation and grandparental access. But how can you possibly claim family rights to someone you legally declared non-existent 22 years ago? Simply to protect your stock portfolio. Checkmate. I didn't look at them. I just stared at the judge. The chaos was immediate. Reporters were shouting. My mother let out a small, strangled sob. My father just sat there, staring at the document on the screen. The artifact of his own cruelty. The judge's gavel slammed down. Again and again. Order, order, case. Dismissed. With prejudice. All claims are denied. And this court, he said, glaring at my parents, recommends the district attorney's office open an investigation into the plaintiffs for conspiracy to commit fraud. It was over. Reporters swarmed. But I didn't see them. I just walked out. Stephen at my side. Outside. The snow was falling softly. Patricia Russo was waiting for me on the courthouse steps. Not even wearing a coat. She was just watching the snow. 30 years ago, she said quietly, as I stood next to her. David Morgan bankrupted my first bookstore. That property in Back Bay he was so worried about, that was my lease. He used a loophole to break it and build one of his glass towers. I lost everything. I stared at her, finally understanding. When you found me in that alley, it wasn't an accident. Charlotte, she said. She looked at me, her eyes sharp. Justice takes time. It needs the right tool. I couldn't be the weapon, but I knew how to forge one. She squeezed my arm, and for the first time, I saw her smile. The coldest iron. Charlotte, the strongest steel. The Morgan Empire didn't just crack, it dissolved. After the fraud investigation, the SEC charges followed. David and Mary lost everything. Their company, their house, their name. Justin Price pleaded guilty to his part in the conspiracy and served 18 months. I did what Patricia taught me. I didn't let my legacy be about hate. I used the profits from Aperture Learning to establish the Russo Foundation, a fund dedicated to helping young, single mothers get the education they were denied. Stephen Ross eventually stopped being just my lawyer. We built a new family. One based on loyalty and choice, with Elijah at its center, standing at the opening gala for the foundation. Watching Elijah now, a confident young man designing the first coding course for our recipients, I finally understood the truth. Everyone talks about the pain of losing a family, but they don't talk about the courage it takes to cut off a toxic bloodline. It's not a loss. It's a reclamation. It's the moment you finally stop bleeding for the people who cut you. You don't owe loyalty to those who tried to destroy you. You realize that real family isn't the blood you share. It's the people who show up when you're bleeding. Have you ever had to make a hard choice to save yourself? Who is the family that you chose?